everybody, this is Jessica from Jessica Lizelle Cannon, and I'm so excited today because I have a really good friend of mine that has joined us, and this is Katie Epps from My Body GX. And when I was going through the information that I wanted to discuss today for lifestyle, she was the first person that came to mind because she is awesome. So Katie, can you tell me what is My Body GX?
Yeah. First, thank you so much for having me. I really am excited about this topic. So My Body GX uses DNA testing for nutrition and fitness wellness. We go through everything from how your body utilizes macronutrients, which are your proteins, carbohydrates, and fats, how your body breaks down food into micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals, and passes them through the cellular wall, all the way through how your body breaks down body fat through cardiovascular exercise, how your body changes with resistance training, your anti-aging properties, mental acuity, early hearing loss, systemic inflammation. So how does your body deal with the stress and the inflammation of the things that you're putting upon it? How do we correct that? What's the best way to feed you? When's the best time to train your body? And it's all 100% custom based on your DNA. So my background, I have a degree in chemistry, but I've been in nutrition and fitness. I had that interest for as long as I can remember. I've been coaching for 12 years. I did bodybuilding for a while, so I got really into very specific tight nutrition and really tight fitness programming. I probably gave a lot of people head cases over that, just due to how, that body on bodybuilding, that's only an 18-hour physique. And so what I changed to in the last 5 years is really looking at lifestyle. So how do you, what I call, be boat ready? So when you put on a swimsuit and you go out on your boat, how do you feel amazing in the skin that you have? How do you have the most amount of energy? How do you feel, the best gut health? Like, nobody wants to feel gassy and bloated. Nobody wants to feel lethargic and tired. So how do you maintain that healthy lifestyle through all points in your life?
Right, and that seems to be what happens to so many people right now, is that they have lost focus of lifestyle. We fall into that comfort zone. We fall into this growing convenience.
Yes.
And when we end up fatigued, and we end up highly stressed, and we end up having so many different issues and going to the wrong or the bad fixers. And a lot of time that ends up being food.
Right, and food goes in two ways. It can either be a comfort thing or a control thing. So if you're using it as a comfort, a lot of people end up gaining weight or, smashing their adrenals, or just feeling that overall emotional fatigue from what those, heavy, starchy or processed foods do to you. Or they use food as a control. And that's really where that relationship with food turns into a very negative thing. So are they controlling how they're eating? The yo-yo dieting and crash dieting. So you're still putting your body into adrenal fatigue, only now you're starving while doing it. So
exactly.
So now you're hangry.
Yes.
Now you're hangry and hateful, or you could be like chubby and happy, but you're not really happy.
Exactly. And that's where over a period of time, we don't realize how much we're actually damaging our system. Yes. And as I got further into caring for my mother, that's where I realized what was happening to her. Why was this happening to her? And is this something that could potentially happen to me? And so I stopped right away and started looking into it. And I admit, I approached this in the beginning, I approached it in a very vain way, because I don't want to increase my aging any faster than it already naturally would be. But at the same time, I don't want this to be my story in the end. And facing possible dementia, the first thing I thought of was, this is just genetic related. So this eventually will be me. But then when I started to actually pay closer attention to her and watch her routines, see what she was eating, when she was eating, how much she was eating, that started to clue me in that this can't all be genetic.
Right.
And so the further I researched it, I realized, and it actually came to be more of a relief, that this is not purely genetic. And that's something that I want people to understand, that if you have someone in your family and they have any form of dementia, not to automatically just reside to the fact that this is going to be me because it's genetics. Because there are so many things that we can do now, and so many things that young parents can do now that can totally change that trajectory of our lives just by changing our lifestyle.
You're exactly right. So genetics, like your actual DNA, is your predisposition for something. It's not your end all be all. You can change
Right.
things environmentally. So as an example, on a very superficial phase, my body naturally has a low tendency to burn body fat through cardiovascular exercise. I know y'all can't see me, but I'm 5'3" and 115. So I have no issue losing body fat in that, I mean, genetically, quote unquote, I do, but knowing that information about my body is how I learned then to manipulate my environment to figure out how to change that. So
Right.
ultimately, what does that actually mean? It just means that my body goes through glucose and glycogen slower. So if you have that information, how do you treat it? And so knowing that you have a genetic predisposition to potentially acquiring Alzheimer's, you could then look at environmentally, what can you do for your body? What can you do for your family? And even for your aging parent, like what can you do for them to either ease or eliminate the effects of that disease? So how do you start feeding your body? And you can really look at then that as food is your medicine.
Exactly. And that's where I've come to, is that instead of doing the convenience or the quick fix, if I'm dealing with fatigue issues, if I'm dealing with a lot of cravings, stop and think, what am I feeding myself? What am I doing that I should undo? And then instead of using other alternatives as my medicine, so to speak, then food really should be my focal point as far as food being my medicine. So how is that something that someone could potentially change or learn to add into their diets or their lifestyle now?
Sure. Well, let's first talk about food. What is it broken down into? So some people have heard of like count your macros, count your calories. People don't really know what that actually means. So your macronutrients are your actually energy, is the energy that's provided by food, which is your protein, your fat, and your carbohydrates. So many foods are a combination of one or more of those things. So for example, animal protein is a combination of both protein and fat. Your vegetables are generally a combination of carbohydrates and protein. Avocado is is actually all three: carbohydrates, fat, and protein. So everything has a little bit of a different ratio. So understanding that initially, so what are you feeding your body that you're for your energy? What does that energy source look like? But then secondarily, your food also breaks down into your micronutrients, which are your vitamins and minerals. And this is a lot of time where you can actually increase your mood, your energy, heal your body internally by utilizing that information of your micronutrients. So for an example, vitamin B6, I call our happy vitamin because it is our natural mood elevator. It actually naturally gives us more energy. So for example, if you were, say, hitting the 3 o'clock hour and you're like, gosh, like I'm not feeling it. You don't really want to go grab that, third cup of coffee of the day. What could you feed your body to reboost your body, your natural hormones, your natural energy levels? Well, B6 rich foods. You could have a handful of pistachios. You could have a little bowl of watermelon. If you were looking more on the protein side, tuna has a lot of B6 in it. You could do a piece of avocado toast.
Right.
So all of those things, like you could naturally boost your own energy. And you can look at then the foods that you're consuming too. Like if you decided to do pistachios, that is a fat and a little bit of a protein. So you could actually have that and know that you're feeding your body a good quality fat, which is something that we'll probably at some point talk about, like good fats versus bad fats. But feeding yourself something really good and nutritious, and then you also know that you can then get through that fatigue while still feeding your body good things.
Right. And the more I did this, and as I gradually learned bit by bit, I found myself with so much more energy. I was able to sustain that energy throughout the day. And I wasn't hitting that 2 o'clock lull like I used to. And before I stepped away from the whole corporate world, I realized a lot of corporate offices put so much money into their coffee and the break room setup, because that's what in their mind keeps their employees productive. And when I fell into that trap of the caffeine fix at 2 o'clock, then it seemed like it helped me get that last bit of burst of energy for the day, but I was that much more exhausted by the time I got home and heading towards the couch, sitting on the phone, sifting through social media, and saying, I don't have the energy. I know I should be working out or even walking in the very least, but I was just too tired, mentally exhausted, but physically exhausted. And then as I stepped into my mother's world, I saw her way more fatigued more often. And then looking at the types of food she was eating, it was like, how do I shift this? And so I thought, well, if this is working for me, then I need to try and start putting this into her diet as well. But then I found myself in that very frustrating position where the more she declined mentally, I found myself comparing her to my children, the age-wise. And I know it's hard to do and it's hard to accept, but then I realized if I'm going to hide food or trick them to eat good, then I had to do the same thing for her and trick her to eat well.
Yeah. And oh my gosh, there's so many truly fun ways to hide nutrition into food. I have tons of recipes. I do it to my family a lot. I was sharing with you a story earlier. This is a word to the wise out there. I puree a lot of food. So I'll puree spaghetti, squash, I'll puree zucchini, butternut squash, cooked and cooled sweet potatoes. Well, I found a recipe for beets. And I actually got this from Jessica Seinfeld, Jerry Seinfeld's wife. She has 3 or 4 cookbooks, and they're all about super convenient, kind of life on the go, moms on the go, caregivers on the go.
Yes.
But because she has, I think, 3 or 4 children, she was also trying to get them to eat more vegetables and more well-rounded foods and things like that. So she started pureeing all these foods and putting them into dishes that she was naturally cooking. For as an example, she would make her family macaroni and cheese, but then she would also put in butternut squash into it. And it was not detectable because it's a very lightly flavored vegetable. And especially once it's boiled and then cooked or, cooked down or baked and cooked. So I was following all these recipes. Well, I decided that I was going to puree some beets. And I was making meatloaf that night. And so I took all of the leftover puree from the things that I had portioned out. And there was sweet potato and a little bit of butternut squash. I think there was a little bit of zucchini. I think there was maybe a little leftover carrot. And then there was the beet in there. And I just mixed it all into my ground turkey with some onion and garlic, whatever, and put it in the oven and I baked it. Well, my husband knew that I was working on pureeing these foods and he was like, so, what are we eating tonight? And I was like, oh, just meatloaf. It's fine. You love meatloaf. Anyway, I cut down the center of this turkey meatloaf, which is generally white in color, fluorescent pink tube down the center. And he was like, what is that? And I was like,
busted.
I mean, maybe some beets. And he's like, I knew it. This is going to taste like dirt. It does taste like, I was like, it does not. It tastes amazing.
And then you get back into your head because, I don't like the taste of this because as a kid maybe, because that was my thing. As a kid, I hated Brussels sprouts. Just hated them. And I could never even come close to cauliflower. But now as an adult,
things change and you learn how to season things and, we're no longer eating, frozen boiled Brussels sprouts, which is super foul. Now we're having things like, roasted Brussels sprouts with balsamic vinegar that's been caramelized and things that are a lot more thoughtfully flavorful. But also in pureeing food, you want to be careful what foods you puree. So you want to make sure that it's foods that are naturally either sweet or light in flavor. So think that you would do like your carrots. Parsnips is a great one because it's almost flavorless, but it has a lot of nutrients in it. Spinach is another thing, although it will give you that green undertone depending on what you're putting it in.
Right.
But then other foods that are very flavorful, like I would not puree asparagus.
Or
Brussels sprouts is your example.
That makes sense.
So you want to do things that are lighter and sweeter in flavor because you can really fold those into most things. And because most of our processed foods are so artificially enhanced with sweetness, our families never really realize that we're putting a vegetable as a sweetener as opposed to whatever processed food comes in.
That's perfect because my mother had another thing as she's declined, her palate has become bitter and sweet. She will not eat so many different foods. Thankfully, she likes, or I should say, loves sweet potatoes, but I can't give that to her every day, every day. Even I get burned out after several days in a row. But she doesn't want to eat unless items are sweet. And so I had to revert to, okay, if I couldn't find a good balanced meal for her regularly, then we started supplementing shakes where I would put all of the berries, the strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, bananas, and then throw in a healthy organic plant mix. She loved it because it was sweet and she didn't realize what she was getting. And I would alternate depending on how much water she had for the day. I'd either use coconut water or I would use rice milk instead. And it would be something that she loved it. And I felt so much relief because she was finally getting something well balanced. But I kind of got booted back with it because I tried and got a little ahead of myself. I tried to throw in the spinach and the kale
But it turned the wrong color.
and it turned green. And so instead of it being this wonderful pinkish or purplish drink, she wouldn't touch it because what is this? It's green. Ew. And I would try, and I could do the spinach and kale with the green apple or with kiwi or something that would keep it sweet, but it was green. So it was the wrong color to give her.
My children are the same way. I will flavor, and bananas are extremely strong in flavor. Pineapple is extremely strong in flavor. And so I'll do like maybe pineapple and strawberry, coconut milk, and then it kind of like pina colada-esque.
Right.
But then I'll throw in a handful of spinach. Like, why is it green? Like my husband will literally be like, yeah, you can make me a smoothie as long as there's nothing green in there. Oh my gosh, okay.
But avocado, that's like the best thing to have.
And it makes it so smooth.
And it's creamy.
Yes. But I have some examples of some really fun ones that you can incorporate. And something that would be really good for your mom is zucchini or pumpkin bread, because you can grate a bunch of extra vegetables in it. Not only the zucchini, but you could even add things like raisins. You could add walnuts to give walnuts break down into omega 3 and 6s. I think 3 and 6s plus a little bit of protein. So you're getting those higher quality while still giving her a sweet quote unquote treat.
Exactly.
Mashed potatoes. This is my new favorite thing. I take mashed potatoes, and when I'm boiling the potatoes, I put in, have you seen those like riced cauliflower bits? They call it cauli bits.
Yes.
I don't know if they call it everywhere. They call it at HEB here. But I'll take a half a bag and I'll boil it with the potatoes. And then I take non-fat Greek yogurt instead of sour cream. And
even better.
Salt and pepper. And I take the hand mixer and blend it together so nobody ever knows. Sometimes I'll grate a fresh garlic into it. And it's super flavorful, super everything. And nobody ever knows that it doesn't have, or that it has the cauliflower in it. You could also grate parsnips in there. You could do celery when it's boiling, because all of that basically boils down to mush. And then when you blend it together, you can't see it, you can't taste it. It just is like mashed potatoes.
Right.
Super flavorful.
That's perfect.
I hide a lot of things in any kind of ground meat. So if you're making meatballs, you can do it depending on what kind. If you're making Italian meatballs, I would do something a little bit more sassy. So something like a parsnip that doesn't have a lot of flavor. But if you're going to do kofta, and we were talking about this earlier, which for people that don't know what it is, it's a Lebanese or Greek meatball. You can mix it with lamb or beef or chicken or turkey, whatever ground protein that you want. But because it has allspice is one of the most flavorful spices, that's a sweeter spice, you could put like cooked, cooled, and pureed sweet potato or butternut squash in there. And it just gives it a little bit more texture, a little bit more flavor. My mom and I make spaghetti sauce, and we make it quarterly. And we take whole real tomatoes, zucchini, summer squash, butternut squash, bell peppers, onions, garlic, mushrooms, carrots, and spinach, and bake them in the oven. And when then they come out, then I put them in the blender and process them. And then I cook it with fresh garlic and tomatoes and olive oil, and then kind of bring all of that up to a boil, and that creates the base of the sauce. And then the carrots actually come in at the very end. So most spaghetti sauce, I don't know if you know this, has sugar in it, because it cuts the acid.
Exactly.
If you put a cup and a half of carrots, which is adding tons of vitamins, nutrients, beta carotene into it, you don't actually need the sugar.
Because it naturally sweetens it.
I
love that. And that's the alternative. So that's another thing that I learned, that it wasn't, when I started to change my diet, I kind of had that feeling of loss. But then I realized if I would just substitute one for something else, that I wasn't losing anything, and I was gaining in the end. So that's,
Do you like pizza?
I love pizza.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so have you heard of cauliflower?
Yes, I've just recently come into that.
So for those of you who don't know, cauliflower is a cauliflower-based pizza crust. It's very crispy, so it's like a thin crust. I've done this. You can make an entire vegetable pizza off of it. So like
Perfect.
I'll do like a little drizzle of olive oil, paint it through all of your favorite things. So like we put spinach, mushrooms, olives, bell peppers, onion, jalapeno because I like spicy.
Oh, yeah.
And then you can either do, depending on your cheese of choice, you could do, buffalo mozzarella. You could do just, plain mozzarella or something. Or you can do like goat cheeses or sheep cheeses. And especially people that have lactose allergies, these are very safe.
I fall in that category, unfortunately. And that's my drawback is, as I continue to learn good food, bad food, that's one of the things where it's really confusing. Cheese is good, cheese is bad, dairy's good, dairy's bad, eggs are good, eggs are bad. I mean, balancing that out, and of course, anything is okay in moderation, but there are some things that aren't really okay because it throws the bacteria, and that's one of the things that I never considered before, but I had once you get onto this path and it starts to kind of snowball because you get so much more information that you realize not only is food our medicine, but the reason it's our medicine is because there's this thing called brain-gut connection. Yep. And what I finally found out was the bacteria. And at first I thought, well, bacteria, does that mean is it something infectious? Am I sick?
Right.
But there's really, our bodies are so magnificent because there is really a deliberate design in having a certain amount of good bacteria and bad bacteria. And certain foods that we eat throw that balance off.
Yes. Yeah. So would it shock you to know that you have over 100 million neurons in your stomach? So like, that whole gut feeling when your belly kind of flip-flops and your like bowels turn to water and you're extremely nervous or extremely anxious.
Right.
That's all gut. That has nothing really to do with your brain. And it's really your body's preparation for what it's going to deal with situationally. And keeping that balance corrected, making sure that your serotonin levels stay on point, making sure that you have like that really good base and connection so that when you do come into those stressful situations, whether that is caring for a parent or a work event or something with your children, whatever it is that you're coming into, that your body actually is prepared. And so like we were talking about, like being a preemptive strike, making sure that we are prepared for whatever negativity that's going to eventually pop into our life, that we can then respond to it in a healthy, positive way so our bodies respond that way too.
Right.
So there's a few things that you can do to really improve your gut health. The main thing is eating a diverse group of foods. And I love to talk to people because they're like, I absolutely detest, put in the space, whatever food you absolutely detest.
Right.
And I would say, well, you know what? You're so lucky because God gave us so many foods because
Exactly.
He knew we weren't going to like just one. I mean, if He didn't want us to have this beautiful variety with all these colors and all of this flavor, we probably could have just eaten dirt and survived. I mean, He had that power.
Thank God He didn't.
So knowing that and eating a diverse variety, most of us get lost in that. So as a general rule, the American diet comes down to we eat about 5 different proteins and about 12 different vegetables. But there's just so much more variety out there that not only is going to give us more flavor and more excitement in our meals, but actually that biodiversity. So what prebiotics, so how does your gut initially handle your food? Your probiotic, how does it continue to digest that food and pass it along in your actual intestines, the prebiotic in your gut? All of those things actually play a part into not only our absorption, but then also our mood and our energy levels and our adrenals and how our hormones are responding. A lot of women and this is sort of slightly off subject, but a lot of women in their mid-30s to mid-40s start exuding signs of thyroid issues. This is more so than ever before in history, and I don't think it's because we have a more advanced scientific understanding. I think it's because more than any other time in history, we put so much more stress,
Yes.
not only on ourselves, but environmentally, we allow that stress to take over, and we're
Exactly.
not handling that systemic inflammation in a healthy way.
Right.
And you saw that a lot.
Yeah, and that's where that vicious cycle comes in. And that's where I struggled for many years where I had to break that cycle. I think, of course, not everybody has the opportunity to step away from the corporate world. That's their livelihood. But had I known this while I was there working, it would have been something I could have incorporated into the day to day. But it was like I kept having all these excuses. I don't have the time for this. I don't have the energy for this. I don't have the focus for that. I kept pushing it away. And the more I pushed it away, I just had to keep existing. I had to keep up with the day-to-day demands, and whether that was parenting, whether that was at work, or my own personal level of emotions. I just kept pushing it away until I realized if something's going to change, it's going to have to be little bits day by day. And I had to start somewhere, and the food, and then the exercise, and then the sleep, and then the meditation. I mean, all this kind of stuff, and we'll get further into some of that, but seeing the difference between what I was experiencing and then watching what my mother was experiencing, that's what kept me going back. What did she do when she was in her 30s and 40s? And it seemed like we have been in this pattern for so long, and as time goes by, it's no longer the single working family, like one spouse works, the other spouse stays home. There's so many of us that there's two spouses working and the kids are fending for themselves, or there's the fast food run through because that's the convenient time fill in. So that this drawback of this roller coaster ride of hormones rising, hormones falling,
Yes.
and then not knowing, did I just, because part of my issue was pushing it back was, oh, I'm just getting older. So I was trying to accept it as I'm just getting older. It's part of aging, but it's not always the case.
Right.
And so the more I tried to adjust my mother's daily routine and seeing that my improvements were working, guess what? It started to work for her too. And it didn't have an issue with age. That's when I started realizing the balancing between her gut and her mood swings, her cravings, I mean, her hormonal level, because it just all seemed to work.
The more that you can because we have to eat anyway, right? The more that you can diversify your foods and put in good foods, especially, so I think most of us at some point, either in the day or in the week, have a sweet tooth.
Oh yeah.
How do you
Definitely.
Yeah, so how do you put the right things in and still curb that sweet tooth? And there's so many great options. I mean, obviously fruit is the number one
Right.
that's going to be a perfect go-to, but I have so many people that are like, "Oh, but I really love chocolate." Excellent. Unless you have an issue with kidney stones, dark chocolate is a great option. You can melt it down and put it in with your peanut butter or your nut butter. You could honestly just have a square of Dove dark chocolate, and then how do you pair it so that you're not just going to eat another square and
Right.
then another square.
Right.
And so usually, like, when I'll write a nutrition plan, especially if somebody who's like, I absolutely must have chocolate in my daily routine, great.
Yeah.
So you can do it a few different ways. One, you can do it as a chocolate smoothie, and you can do, like chocolate protein and some cherries. And if you like mocha, you can add a little cold coffee to it. Really great morning. Honestly, it's probably one of my favorite morning smoothies. Or if you're more of a nighttime chocolate person, you can take that dark chocolate of your Dove, take blueberries and cashews, and chop up your Dove chocolate, or maybe get small chips of dark chocolate. Then you have a finger snack.
That's perfect.
Or you could melt it and put it over, like drizzle it over an apple and almond butter with some dark
That's
chocolate.
even better because that falls right into the whole portion control.
Yep. And that's honestly more than anything, and I see this a lot with vegans and vegetarians specifically, people are putting good things many times in their body, but not in the right portion. So I don't know if you've ever seen like the beautiful Pinterest picture, and this is my favorite one to paint. It's this gorgeous salad, and you have like all of these beautiful underlying tones of, leafy greens and shaved carrot and maybe some beet and maybe some radish. And it's just like all these beautiful colors. And on top of it is 2 avocados sitting open face. And then in the middle of those avocados where the pits used to be is 2 hard-boiled eggs cut in half. And so it's like, all of the amazing undercolor, and on the top is, the beautiful green, then white, then yellow, and, that separates into the 4. That's 50 grams of fat.
Well, that's one of the things that I didn't understand was I started making my salads, and if I just incorporated all of the bright colors, as many as I could, and of course after a period of time, those same bright colors I kept having over and over and over, I had to figure out, okay, what other colors are out there?
Yes.
What other things can I add to my salad and still get it? But then again, I think I made it so lean that I wasn't putting enough fat in it.
That's possible.
Adding the avocado was great, but then I realized I was also adding the egg, and I thought, well, in some cases I really could have, depending on my activity for the day, I guess. And if it was lunch or if it was a dinner, how much should I have added? Because putting that egg in there on top of the avocado, it's like I doubled up on the protein for me, for myself.
Right.
And then on top of it, if I put all of this wonderful stuff in there, I felt like I canceled it out just by adding dressing. And then I had to be considerate of what kind of dressing I could add.
Yes, and dressing a lot of times will throw things off a lot. The way that I always recommend people flavor their foods, especially things like their salads and such, is with citrus, because there's really no calories associated with it. Now, a lot of times, like I've been told, like a dressing has to be an oil and an acid and a sweetener. I don't think so. Like, I think it depends. So my absolute all-time favorite salad is an arugula salad with shaved Parmesan, salt, pepper, and drizzled in lemon. That's it.
Nice.
And it's
Simple.
It's so simple. It's so easy. It's a great, beautiful side dish for really any protein, any meal that you're making. It goes Italian. It goes Greek. It goes, like whatever your flavors are. It's a little awkward with Thai food and Asian food, but
True.
But honestly, then you have like the plethora of like, oh my gosh, you could do like bok choy. You can, like
Right.
the Asian style has like its own incredible variety of flavors of vegetables in themselves. But I agree with you. I think having different salads, or I think most of us think of salad as like the base of green and then shave some vegetables on top.
Yes.
But it doesn't have to be that lame. Like, there can be a lot more to it, so.
And I think that's where people get turned off with salads, because when you think of, lifestyle and diets, and I know when I was trying to introduce my sister to kale, her first response was, no thanks, I'm not a cow, I don't like to eat grass.
Fair.
And so I get that, but there's so many different ways of how to prepare the food. And even for myself, when I got burned out on something, it was because I wasn't switching things up. I was thinking it had to be a very specific way. And there's so many different things out there.
One of my most recent fun salads that I made is, have you had radicchio?
No.
Okay, so
least
radicchio
not yet.
it's a purple lettuce. It's a little bit slightly sharper in taste. It looks like a purple cabbage, only smaller. Cut off the bottom, and it has the same look as like a cabbage. You'd open it, open leaf style. But then I found a recipe where you saute mushrooms. I think it was mushrooms, onions, and thyme. And it was a variety of mushrooms. So it was shiitake, it was oyster. I went ahead and went bananas with the mushrooms because I was like, well, they have all these great, textures and nutrients in them. Really good prebiotics. So I think I did oyster mushrooms. Anyway, I did 4 or 5 different mushrooms. I went ahead and splurged a little bit on that. But then you saute them down and cook them down a little bit. And so they're hot. And then you put it on this fresh, crisp radicchio. And I don't remember, I think you would have the option of either sprinkling it with parm or not. I don't believe that we did. But it was so flavorful. And it was so beautiful because it was that purple leaf, and then it had like the mushroom and then the green thyme. It was beautiful for a salad, and just a completely different take on a salad because it wasn't green at all. It was purple.
Yeah, exactly. It totally changes everything
Totally
up.
changes everything. I think cooked vegetables, we run into that same issue as well. is that you're like, oh, broccoli again, green beans.
Yeah, green bean. Oh
again.
gosh, growing up with that.
Yeah.
If you know, and that was the thing is, and we did a previous show on the boomerang effect, and to me, growing up with vegetables, that very narrow-minded, and not to speak ill of my parents in any way, but it's just you know what you know, and their family didn't have very many vegetables. It was always the Spanish rice, fried pork chops, fried bananas, just a lot of the heavy Puerto Rican rich, and yes, flavorful, but a lot of heavy foods that very little to no vegetables, and definitely not any interest in salads.
It's interesting what is popular, and it's interesting what's popular depending on where you live in the world. So, for example, probably the two healthiest cultures is Japanese and Mediterranean. And Mediterranean will go everywhere from the southern tip of Spain, obviously the bottom half of Italy, Sicily, Greece, and then we're looking into that Lebanese culture. Right. And their flavors are so bright, and there's a lot of fish. There's a lot of good fat, so some olives, olive oil, a lot of goat cheeses, because in that mountain area that was a little bit easier for them to cultivate as opposed to cows, which they need that range for.
True.
So just naturally, due to their environment, they were producing something that was healthier for them anyway. But then lots of like green food and lots of fruit. And so that culturally, those countries and those peoples are just naturally have better lifestyle, better skin, better hair, better physiques. And then you look at Western diet and a lot of Central, South, even South American, depending on if you live on the coast, they have a tendency to have more fishes and more vegetables. But the more inner towards the center of those countries, I mean, it's a lot of rice and beans. And the reason for that is it's a complete protein, and you can be very, very poor and be able to afford it. But because it's a complete protein, people aren't suffering from the ill effects of not having those branched chain amino acids that we don't naturally produce. But then they're not getting, they pass down from culture to culture. Like, all right, let's go ahead and ground up some corn, and we'll put, corn with some rice and some beans, and here's your dinner.
Right.
Wow, exciting.
Missed the mark on that one.
Yeah. So and culture, American culture is just as bad, because so much of our country is in the center of our country, which is that Midwestern or central farmland, cows, just not a lot like meat and potatoes. Like we're kind of a meat and potato culture, and it's just it's economical. And it's easy to cultivate, even in really like bad soil. And so over the last, 150 years, that's what people are generating more too. Now, I will give us that in the last probably 20 years, we are becoming a lot more thoughtful and intelligent about,
finally.
Yes, about the food that's coming in. So it'll be great for our children and the generations going forward. But for those of us who are in our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s,
exactly,
we're fighting what our parents thought was awesome, in that they could buy cereal at the store as opposed to making oatmeal or porridge at home.
See, and that's where we have to stop and think and relearn. And the big thing, be open to learning and wanting to change. And it's hard.
Yeah, and something that you had talked about was so much of, and this was before we jumped on the podcast, but something that you had talked about was so much of what we eat is learned when we go to school.
Exactly, and that's what is frustrating to me, is that learning where we are now, me personally, how did I get to this point? Well, of course, that took me back down memory lane, and how I grew up and what I learned from my parents, and then what my grandparents taught my parents. And I just kept going further and further back, and I realized this is a way of life that we've learned. And so now at this point in time, we have to stop and relearn. But how do we relearn when our children in school are learning the same exact poor habits, and they're advocating for it, and it turns into the political part of it. Then you go into a totally different area where it's all marketing based. So the marketing ploy of all of this, and to the extent of the lobbyists, where you have beef companies and dairy companies who lobby into the heart foundations, and it's just incredible, and how our kids continually get bombarded with this. And when I started looking into my own diets, my own day-to-day habits, and transitioning then my children into it, because they are, as we've heard so many different times, they are our future. And I've tried to tell my sons that I don't want them to have to step back and catch that boomerang of having to then come back once they get out into the world. And yes, I want to see them and enjoy as they get older and they get married and have kids, but I don't want them to have to return so much earlier in life as I have for my mother, so that they could care for me just because I had poor habits, but transitioning them out of their bad habits that I've indirectly taught them, because from what I know, that's been a struggle, because once you start off with, and you had mentioned earlier with the macaroni and cheese, starting off the convenient areas where at first I had one that my oldest would eat anything you put in front of him, except for squash. And then I had my second that would only eat nuggets and mac and cheese. Because that's what I introduced him to after a while. And it was really hard to break. And even now as a teenager, and I experienced it to an extent, young adult, that the bad effects, side effects of some of the foods that are out there, acne. What teenager out there doesn't already go through acne as an issue for, hormonally, but then you throw in certain foods that cause it, and it's way worse. And so as an adult, I had the adult acne for a couple of years, and because I was so highly stressed, and I'd come home from work and I'd sit on the couch and I'd binge on potato chips, Lay's potato chips. And when I finally got to the point where I realized I needed to make that change and pulling back from that, it was hard. I did have to literally wean myself off of this, but my face cleared up, the acne went away, and then I thought, well, if this is for me, then I need to do the same for my son. So I had slowly stopped buying things, and it all had to be slow. It couldn't be cold turkey cut, because that's where you get the yo-yo diets. And when you're fighting that craving, then you're not really changing things, you're just temporarily postponing. So this way of how we are teaching our children is huge.
For sure.
Because even in the Asian culture overseas, they have our Western diet is going further and further out into the world. And the more they are adapting to our Western diet, the more their younger generation are abandoning their traditional food.
Healthy
foods. And now even in the Asian cultures, they are also dealing with astronomically rising numbers of Alzheimer's.
I feel like government-wise, they're getting a little bit better. So in 2011, they came out with something called Plate, or My Plate. And the government started shifting their view on what traditional, or what quote-unquote healthy food should look like. So if we all think back to when we were kids in school and we think of the food pyramid, on the bottom was all the brown food. And then above it was, dairy and protein and animal proteins. Like, they didn't really talk about plant proteins at that time. And then you had, second to the top, in one of the smaller sections, you did half fruit and half vegetables. And then at the very top was your sugars and your fats. What they've done now is they're actually encouraging a more plant-based nutrition plan. So the biggest part of, if you think about a plate as being a circle, and if you were to cut it into 4 quadrants and shift those quadrants, so maybe instead of it being a quarter, maybe a third of your nutrition should come from green vegetables, and maybe a quarter from fruit, and then maybe a quarter from grain, and then less than that would be, so less than your third of your quarter, your third, would be your animal protein. Or honestly, it doesn't even have to be animal protein, because you could really look at different sources of plant-based proteins and legumes, things like that.
That's absolutely true. And that's something that we need to go towards more often than not. Just because when I started to do that, my energy level was there. It totally sustained me, and it supports the fact. And when my sister made the comment of she didn't want to have kale just because she's not a cow, well, if you look at the animals, look at rabbits, look at the horses, their muscle tone, look what they eat, their daily diets, and it's a lot of plant-based green, and so they're not eating animal protein.
Right.
Obviously not. They're
Right. Not all of them were meant to, but so like we're omnivores, so we can. We definitely have the gut
True.
bacteria to do it. We definitely have the teeth for it. I think it's great to make that as a personal choice. But if you want to try a more plant-based or even just a whole food-based nutrition plan, there's so many really fun ones. I say fun because I like to try different nutrition plans, but different ones out there that you can try. And I think the one that comes to mind, and this was a huge effect on my family, was in January we did Whole30. And there's a reason they call it Whole30 and not Whole Life. It is not sustainable. But it's an exclusionary diet. So basically, no dairy, no sugar, no grains, which includes corn. Corn is a grain. No legumes, no alcohol, of course, because that is sugar. So for 90 days, for 30 days, you're eating only whole foods, fruits and vegetables. You can do some plant or nut-based powders, but the goal is not to like remake food that you binge on in, approved food. So for example, you wouldn't make pancakes out of almond flour because that's obviously something that would be binge worthy for you. But you could use it, as like filler for making a meatball or something like that. All whole natural animal or fish proteins. If you decide to do that, you could do it 100% plant-based. All of your oils are natural buys. So for fat, you wouldn't do butter, but you could do ghee, which is a clarified butter. They take all the lactose off of it when they boil it. You could do olive oil, of course. You could do avocado, of course. Certain coconut oils. If you wanted a more salty flavor, you would do coconut aminos as opposed to normal aminos. Oh, no soy was another thing that was on there.
Right.
But that basically takes all of the inflammatory foods out of your body, and you're just feeding your body all whole natural foods. Now, this is two amazing things if you're willing to try it. One, it's going to give you tons of new recipes because you're so limited in the things that you can make. It also makes you more experimental because you're willing to try more foods because, let's be real, there's only so many sweet potatoes, red potatoes, and broccoli and chicken you can eat in a month. Because there's no grains, you have to be very thoughtful about your breakfasts. Also no smoothies, so no fast ways of getting out of things.
So it's like a not necessarily
it's a
a
restart.
cleanse,
Yeah,
but
it's
you
a
are
full system restart. Yeah. So because no dairy, there's also no yogurt. But then in a correlation with that, they don't even want you to do yogurts that are, coconut or whatever based. They really want you to start fresh from natural fruits and vegetables. And this was amazing for my family because my mom has hip dysplasia. She has osteoarthritis in her hip. A year ago, well, maybe a little longer than a year ago, she'd gotten into a car accident and got T-boned. Well, starting after that, she was getting like this pain in her hip. And she probably already had the arthritis, but that definitely aggravated it.
Right.
Well, over the course of like 2 or 3 months after the accident, she was just kind of like walking funny and having a little bit more issues. And my mom's young. And she was, so young, she helps take care of my children. She works at our church and, works with the babies. She's the leader of Sunday school from birth to 3-year-olds. So she is up, down, with the babies, high energy. So she is an incredible woman. Well, my husband called me and I was working at an office at the time. He said, "Your mom can't move her left side." My initial thought was stroke.
Yes.
And so I left the office, drove home. I'm like, "Mom, stick out your tongue." And she's like, "I'm not having a stroke." And I was like, "All right."
Go through the face steps.
I was like, "Okay." So she's like, "I can't stand up." She's like, "I'm in so much pain." So we ended up taking her to the emergency room. They did an MRI on her. And I'm not even kidding you. The doctor said, hip replacement surgery. And I was like,
Right
you're
off the
an
bat.
ER doctor. Like, we haven't even discussed anything. Like, you don't even know what happened. Like, just, hip replacement surgery. So they send her to another doctor, and that doctor barely looks at anything and says, hip replacement surgery.
That was the quick, easy answer.
And I looked at her and I was like, Mom, there's got to be something else. So we went to a compound pharmacy here in Austin, People's Pharmacy. They do everything like homeopathic or as much as humanly possible. They're great at weaning people off of pharmaceutical drugs onto a more homeopathic path. So we went in and said, okay, these are my symptoms. This is my issue. This is what I've been diagnosed with. What are my options? And so she started doing a collagen replacement. She did, an osteoarthritis, multivitamin supplement type thing. And so she was taking 3 pills a day. She had to take them before she ate in the morning. It upset her stomach, but it was better than the hip pain. So she did that for about 9-10 months, almost a year. Well, when we did Whole30, on day 5, she had no hip pain.
That's awesome.
She could walk completely straight. There was no limping. She was having no issues. And she felt amazing. And so I was like,
Exactly.
I wonder what it is. So after Whole30, what they encourage you to do is to start reintroducing those foods that you had excluded. So go ahead and have that glass of wine. If the next day you feel bingy on it, maybe that's kind of your trigger food, and then they recommend going back on Whole30 for a day or 2. Not like for the whole 30 days, but
Not
just that
starting all
same
over
plan.
again. Right.
Incorporate a little bit of dairy. How do you feel after you ate a little ice cream? How do you feel after you had a slice of bread? And what we noticed was anytime that she ate anything with gluten in it, the inflammation was so bad she would hurt for days.
Exactly.
For a piece of toast, or for it sneaks up on you. It's like, breaded chicken or something of that nature.
And we don't think about that.
Exactly.
We don't see that as bread.
Correct. Pasta. Yep.
The staples.
So as we were kind of slowly reintroducing some of these foods, and she was going through those moments of this is just too much. It just hurts. And so we ended up adapting more of a grain-free lifestyle because she feels so much better.
And no hip replacement.
No hip replacement, and she's 1,000 times better. She stopped all of her supplements, and she just doesn't do gluten. And when she does, she knows she's going to pay for it for 2 or 3 days.
That's amazing.
Because she says, I still really do like Christmas cookies, and I'll probably have 1 or 2. Yes. So again, even though it's something that she knows how to affect her, and I think that's also a valuable piece, like, do you know how the food that you're consuming affects you personally? And if you do, then you know when to have a little or not have it at all.
Right.
So like I said, she works in the nursery on Sunday. She is very avid that she does not have anything gluten Thursday, Friday, or Saturday, because she wants to be 100% comfortable, healthy, feeling great for those babies on Sunday.
That is a perfect way to know how to work within your system and how to work around your system. So you're not entirely giving up something. You just know what to expect.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, most weeks she won't consume any gluten. She just doesn't feel the need for it. It's funny because bread smells gross to me now.
Yeah, I did the same thing. A couple years ago, my husband had given up soda for Lent. Mm-hmm. And that was, if he gave it up, I gave it up. It was just a thing. And so by the time Lent was over with, and I went, because at that time, several years ago, I was really into Barq's root beer.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that period of time, and it was a short period of time for me, we're talking 40 days, but by the time it was over with and I went back to the sodas, they didn't taste the same. Mm-hmm. So I just kind of stayed away from it. I was like, if I can handle it 40 days, I can go longer. Yeah. So I just didn't have them as often. And gradually, I just, as time went on, I didn't like the taste of it anymore. And definitely a year or so later, I tried to drink something. I think we went somewhere, and that's kind of one of the things they had, or all they had at that point. And I was thirsty, so I drank it. But I could actually finally taste the sugar, the carbonated water. All of it didn't taste at all good to me. So I just threw it out.
Yeah, and it's amazing how environmentally, when we completely exclude something, and I'm not saying that exclusionary diets are great for life, but they are good for knowing what works for you. But when you exclude something from your nutrition plan and you have it a little bit and you see the effects, or you see the taste change, or you see how things are different, I think that people, if they were willing to gamble on that 30 to 40 days, they wouldn't feel like so much like they're giving up, but more like, I don't want that
anymore. Right. You now have a choice. And that's the whole thing. Is I came at it in the beginning, like I said, I came to this approach in a very vain way. But then once I started to go through the process, and I was trying to be as open-minded but yet disciplined to stick to things, as the days went by and the diet slowly started to change, I liked it.
Yeah.
And I didn't feel like I was losing anything anymore. In fact, the only good thing I was losing was weight.
Yes. Yes. Well, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. Just making sure that the flavor is there. I don't feel like anybody
Right.
ever feels like they're missing something. And between fresh spices, dried spices, depending on your taste, if you like spicier
True.
food. But even if you don't, I mean, the citrus spices are great. If you are a more sweet or savory, a lot of those Middle Eastern, Indian type foods, even actually a lot of African style foods. My neighbors are Nigerian and they make this spicy coconut rice.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
Oh my gosh, it is so good. And so it's like something that has a very sweet undertone,
Right.
but there's no sugar in it.
And
You know,
that's
it's sweetened with tomatoes and
perfect.
coconut milk. You know, so knowing that you can incorporate those different flavors, and I think the more willing you are to branch out in the spice world, the better your palate and the foods that you're putting on your table are going to be.
See, and it's interesting that you bring up that the Nigerian factor was something that I came across as well in terms of Alzheimer's. One of the books that I came across was How Not to Die, and I was amazed because when there's a section in there that the doctor actually speaks to the fact that in Nigeria they have, if you're going to consider DNA as your only factor as to whether or not you're going to be predisposed or you're going to have some form of dementia, the Nigerian culture had the highest count of Alzheimer's, the DNA.
Predisposition.
Right. But on top of that, they also were the lowest count in the world of actual cases with Alzheimer's.
That's
because of
amazing.
their diet.
I can see that.
And so the willingness to step away from the American culture, and it always gets me fired up every time I watch TV and a commercial comes across, or we go to the movies and the previews are pushing these, the marketing of this cool cylinder, chrome looking can that's diet soda this or that, and it's going to improve your life, it's going to give you energy, or the energy drinks that are finding their ways into the schools or accessible for kids to have. And it's just, what are we doing to ourselves? We're doing this to ourselves. There is very little anymore of DNA support for these kind of diseases.
Yeah.
We are doing this to ourselves. So it's just by being open and trying new things. And I'm glad you said this earlier about cooking, that it's fun, because if you make it fun, then you're more likely to stick to it.
Absolutely.
It's not the grudgingly
Yeah.
day to day, I have to do this. And unfortunately, that's where some people end up. They're in the ER. They're having a heart attack. They're having other, definitely for me, it opened me wide. My mind was as wide as could be because I had to have my gallbladder removed. And once I did that, I absolutely had to watch what I was eating.
Yep.
Or I would be miserable, just
Yep.
like your mother was with the
Yep.
gluten.
And I see that in my family, and we have quite a few people that are overweight, and even after multiple heart attacks, they still don't change their nutrition.
Yeah.
Even being having chronic disease and chronic arthritis and like all of these horrible pieces, then they still post on Instagram eating fried catfish,
Right.
eating
Amazes me.
whatever, and I'm like, I don't think that my lifestyle, and I've even written things about how to be cost effectively healthy nutritionally, because I hear a lot oh, it's too expensive to
Right,
eat clean.
right.
Yeah.
It's a luxury to eat plant-based food, and it's really not.
No, it's not. I can feed my entire family for under $50 in the plant department. It'll cost me $100 to feed them in the processed food department.
Exactly.
So it's choice. But I see that, and it's either they don't care enough, or they're still so stuck in that commercialized, but
They just don't know
cereal
any
is
better.
supposed to be healthy for you.
No.
I'm supposed to have my Trix and whole milk in the morning, and I'm supposed to have
With the orange juice on the side.
right, and
all loaded with sugar everywhere you go.
yes, and maybe a piece of toast and peanut butter, and so it's like
why it
all the
says
carbs and all of that.
They get away with it. It's part of a healthy diet.
Right, exactly. Or and I grew up this way too, but the peanut butter and jelly sandwich and
Oh, right.
and the goldfish crackers
Yep.
and the chocolate milk and dried fruit, for heaven's sakes. People, dried fruit is candy.
Yes.
Dried fruit is not fruit. Dried fruit is candy. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's painful. It's painful. But,
I know, and once you learn it, and then so for me, when I'm out in public and I'm at some event, whether it's for my children or just in general, and I see other parents and what they're giving their children, it drives me nuts because I can't walk over to every person. It is a personal choice. Mm-hmm. And when you know better, you do better.
Right, exactly.
And so when I see these other parents, especially when I see young parents putting soda or sweet tea, as we like it here in the South, in a sippy cup.
No, oh my gosh, that's so painful to me.
It infuriates me, but at the same time, I'm like, well, that's kind of how so many people grew up, and they don't know any different.
Yeah, I see it. So we have season tickets to Six Flags, and when you get your season ticket, you get this giant
Yes.
cup.
So you can drink
which
the
is
soda all day long.
free liquid. Mm-hmm. So my children do not realize that you can get anything other than water or lemonade in theirs, and even the lemonade I cut in half with water. But it's amazing how many 6-year-olds I see walking around with some dark soda
Right.
in there. I'll go out to dinner with my in-laws, and it's crazy that my niece gets 2 sodas a week and chocolate milk, and she has a severe weight problem.
Imagine that.
I always think, like, water or milk? And I know, like, there's definitely, like, controversy over the milk thing, but let's be real here. If you want flavored something, water or milk? Like, it's just not that hard, and at least then they're getting protein, and most places are 2%. But even my children will 90% of the time choose water because you get ice cubes in it.
Well, and once you get used to that, that's one of the things that I had to do for my mother because I couldn't get her to drink water. That was the daily struggle, still is to this day. The way I was able to get her to drink water was I got some ice trays, and I sliced up strawberries
Beautiful.
very thinly, and I would put that in the ice trays, fill up with water, and would give her that in her water. So it would sweeten it just enough. And then when she got to the point where she kind of caught on to it again, just like the child,
Sure.
and even me personally, I get it. You get burned out after a while. I had to do the same thing, slice up the strawberries
Yep.
very finely. And then I would get some sort of like ocean spray juice, which was the lowest amount of sugar that I could find. And then even so, water that down and then make the ice cubes out of that. And then we were back on. And after a while, it was just a matter of just changing the flavor of the juice. And I rode that out as long as I could until it was time to find something else to substitute to keep continually getting the water in.
Yep.
And that's the part where, we don't take notice of this until we are having problems, until we're having issues. But instead of waiting until it's the end and or getting closer to the end and we're having reactive moments, the ER or doctors, something's wrong, we need to change the focus and start with our kids, ourselves first of all, but our kids, and start taking more of that proactive approach.
Yes.
Because with my mother, one of her main symptoms, if we went back in time and tried to go as far back as we could, and even as far back as I could remember, one of her main symptoms was depression. When I looked at her diet and how it's been, well, it's no wonder. It wasn't always, we were automatically thinking, oh, it's a chemical based. Her system was just out of balance. She's manic depressive bipolar. And so it's chemical induced. But when you look at the food that she had and when she had it, if she had a morning or a day that she had coffee,
Yep.
and that was the bulk of her nutrient for the day, and I don't even want to call that a true nutrient, then it's no wonder you have the ebb and flows And then you see the rising numbers of teenage suicide.
Yep. I was looking up while you were talking. So ways to flavor your water can actually like benefit you as well. Not only flavor wise, you could actually get a lot out of it to help your mom not only to detox gut or even for your own gut health, but then
Right.
even for like your teenage son, like helping him to focus better when it's coming up on exam time or things
Exactly.
like that. So here's some examples. Like if you were looking for clearer skin, you could take your water and do cucumber, lemon, and mint. Mince that together.
I like that.
Put it in the refrigerator overnight, and then you can siphon it off, throughout the day. If you wanted to enhance your metabolism, so you want a little bit of better fat burner, apples and cinnamon sticks in your water boost your metabolism. Let's say that you were like gassy and bloaty, and you had like kind of like that irritable system. Cucumber, lemon, mint, and ginger. Cool that through your water.
Yes.
Super refreshing. And if you're looking strictly at weight loss, like strictly fat loss, you could do cucumber, grapefruit, and water.
Oh, wow.
And so those are going to be like really flavorful, nutrient dense, because you're going to get some of the nutrients out of the foods that you're putting into it. But then, like for your son, like clear skin. What teenager doesn't want clear skin?
Oh, exactly.
And flavored water.
And see, and that's where, again, people make the mistake because they fall into the marketing, is
Yep.
that flavored water, if you're drinking a carbonated flavored water, then you're back into that cycle of sodas and things that you're not really getting water. I mean, if carbonated, so it's, we're splitting hairs and we're falling into that marketing, and so you're, again, getting away from what we could be doing, what we should be doing.
Definitely options out there, not only to like help with gut health, but then to then help, our stubborns.
Yeah, it took some, unfortunately, and that's how we are wired. It does take something that's pressing enough for us to finally take notice and make the changes. It absolutely did for me. But if we don't make these changes, then the numbers that are rising right now on dementia related will just continue to rise.
Yep.
And it's not just dementia, because we also have the heart related issues, the diabetes,
Yep.
and a lot of that leads to dementia.
Yep.
And
You're
so
exactly right.
it's, some people say, oh, it's dementia and Alzheimer's. Well, Alzheimer's is dementia. It's just the most well-known form. And what we do now through our nutrition protects our heart, protects the rest of our systems, the heart, the brain, the gut.
Yep, for sure. And as a caretaker, you're taking care of you and you're taking care of them.
Right.
And so then how do you make sure that everybody's getting the right nutrition, especially when you also are at the age that you also have children to take care of, you
Exactly.
have a husband, you have a home.
Exactly.
There's so many things.
It's
luckily
exhausting.
that you're working from home, but what if you still have to go to the office every day? Like, how do you feed your body the most efficiently, the healthiest, when let's just be real, you don't have a whole lot of time.
No, and that's how it was before I did step away from the corporate world. I was trying to squeeze everything in, and I eventually started to meal prep, making
Yep,
salads
love
for the
that.
week on Sundays. I would make 5 salads for the week, and Tupperware container. The refrigerator was full of just all kinds of containers. I had one side of the salads I liked, and I had other salads that we made that my husband specifically liked. He loves feta cheese. I can't stand it sometimes. But we made our salads, and then I had separate in containers with chopped up, diced up fruit. And so I had that with me. And then I would make the Ziploc bags, and I would get a bunch of mixed nuts, sometimes lightly salted, sometimes not. And I would get this, what they call here is a imperial mix, and it would have the Brazil nuts, the cashews, the almonds, the pecans, and I would just mix a lot of that up. And I would take that as my daily snack bag for that afternoon lull. And so it was the little things that made the difference.
Yes. Yeah.
For me overall.
So how did you plan your week? Did you make your grocery list on Saturday or Friday, Saturday, and then shop for it, and then meal prep on Sunday? What did that look like?
That's how I used to do it, because it's the working mom, I guess, during the week. it was the last thing in my mind. So come Saturday, we were spending the day doing the house chores and then the groceries. And then by Saturday night, you're exhausted, your weekend's gone. But then eventually during the week, I had a running list that I would just continually, as soon as something ran out, I wrote it down and just jotted down. Or if I came across something that I wanted to try differently, I had to remember to jot it down, because by the time I got to the store, there's too many things to get distracted with and come home with way more than I needed and not what I needed. So the list became more of that definite, dependent driver of what I'm going to buy and what I'm going to stick to.
So how did you kind of change things up? I know that a lot of people, like, again, grilled chicken, broccoli, and mashed potatoes, though healthy-ish,
right?
It's boring.
It gets boring.
Chicken salad every night, again, boring. How did you continue to change things up, especially having a family? How do you continue to bring and introduce new foods or even meals into your kitchen?
So one of the things I did was the seasonings. I started with the seasonings because where for budget consciously, if we bought chicken that had, or a package of chicken that had 8 pieces, I would go through and I would section it off, 4 and 4. Eventually, as my older son moved out, then it was 3, 3 and 2 or something, and just breaking it out to where if we're going to have chicken so often, I don't want the same old chicken
for sure
all the time. So, and especially since we weren't frying anything anymore, I was going to get to the point where I needed to learn seasonings. And so if one day was lemon pepper, for example, the next day was something else, like you said, the savory, just different. And then I even started buying packets of salad dressing. There's a Fiesta, I think it's a Fiesta Ranch, because we like the little bit of the spicy.
Yeah.
And I learned how to cook that with it, and just seasonings coming down to all the different flavors. And then after a while, I was like, okay, I don't care what seasoning I have. I just cannot eat chicken anymore.
Yes.
And so then it had to be, what else is out there? Well, then we turned to turkey, and we were doing, turkey loaves and adding the vegetables. I would grate carrots and add it into, and like diced onions, add that into the meatloaf. And so after a while, it's like you really get stretched to your limits, and so you have to get creative, and trying to find what's creative yet convenient is the happy balance. And it really came down to that grocery list. So I knew what I could freeze, what had to go sooner in the week than later, because if I did, there's times that I like fresh produce versus the frozen vegetables. Trying to find reduce down the amount of staples that we use, the rice, the pastas, transition over to some long grain brown rice or orzos or quinoa, couscous. I mean, just changing it up any way I could. So even if we did have that seasoned chicken, okay, maybe if I change the sides to dress it up a little bit.
Absolutely. We do something similar. So I'm an avid fan of like looking through cookbooks and recipes, and I'm also a huge doctor of recipes. So I will take a recipe that looks amazing, that is probably not as clean as I would want it to be. And I make adjustments.
Tweak it.
Oh, for sure. And especially anything that's like, and optional, you could add 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Just, I'm never doing that. But if you needed, so I made a curry dish a few weeks ago, and it was amazing. So it was like chicken, and it had like a blend of curry seasoning, and then you added coconut milk, and then you added 1.5 cups of carrots to sweeten it, and I think there was mushrooms and spinach, whatever. It was incredibly good. From first chop until fully cooked, it was 22 minutes.
Not bad.
I videoed it, so I timed it. I know I'm kind of a geek like that, but
hey, but practice makes perfect.
That's right. Well, but and then it had so much flavor onto it. But that brown sugar, I could see later, I was like, okay, that would have added just that undertone. Like, it seemed like it was sort of missing something, a sort of undertone of sweet. But as I was prepping it, like the flavor and the smell that came off of that combined between the seasoning and the coconut, I was like, ooh, what would be really good with this is pineapple. And so I actually ended up cutting fresh pineapple and putting it as one of our sides. But next time I would actually probably cook small
with it.
pineapple into it to give it that extra sugar, to give it that extra sweetness, to give it that
Absolutely.
extra flavor. And I don't remember what I put on the side of it. It was one of our favorite dishes, and I think it's of my recipes, it's one of the ones that's most repeated. Like, I have so many friends that have been like, "Oh my gosh, I made your dish last night, and it was incredible," because the depth of flavor was so great. I have two small boys, so it wasn't overly spicy in the hot sense, but it had so much flavor. And the spinach, because it got cooked down, like, they just ate it.
They didn't even realize it was there. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, it was like little green, strings of whatever, but they just, ate
Flattened
it.
green beans.
Yeah,
for all they need to
whatever.
know.
Exactly. They like mushrooms, so that wasn't an issue either. But yeah, it was just very depth of flavor. And so I love to look at recipes and see, what different spices are there. And economically, dried seasonings can give you so much flavor for very little money. And so
Yes.
adding all of that depth of flavor for, when you break it down, maybe an extra 10 cents.
Right.
So worth it. And especially, so we're kind of on a little bit of a curry kick, just because my mom loves those flavors and I'm loving spice right now. But adding those little depths of those flavors and then adding red chili flakes to it, like...
Yes, I
and
agree.
you can flavor everybody's plate differently. So for my children, I don't put any pepper flakes on them because I want them to...
You want them to eat it.
Exactly. Yeah. And to taste the depth of flavor in all of the spices, where sometimes that hot seasoning will take some of that depth of flavor away. But then for, us adults, like, we'll each take a shake at that
Right.
red pepper flakes.
Spice it up.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that we do. But I also look at things for my recipes for 2 to 3 things. How many ingredients are there? Because if I have to cut down, 19 items, it's just not happening. I mean, it's really intensive. If it's going to take more than an hour and a half to cook, that's not lifestyle intelligent for
exactly.
me.
And you can't do it on the run.
Exactly.
And that's where the diets and the lifestyle breaks down.
Yep. And then lastly is how long does it stay in the fridge?
Yes.
So fish, for me personally, is not amazing reheated.
Right.
So, well, honestly, I don't really care that much. My family will not eat heated fish. So if I'm going to do a fish day, I'm really conservative about the portions that I serve. And I'll usually maybe even add a chicken or something on the side for anybody that wanted protein for, the next day or the next day after that. So just being mindful about how long something will last in the refrigerator. Some things, like I made an Israeli salad the other day, which is essentially just a cucumber, tomato, onion, lemon dressing salad. Unbelievably amazing flavor-wise.
Yeah,
but
simple.
It gets better every day.
I love those, yes.
So it lasts about 4 days
Marinates in
before,
it.
it lasts about 4 days before your tomatoes become questionable. But yeah, like day 3, that is the jam. Like, it's nice and cold. Take some shredded chicken breast that's also cold, throw it on top. Amazing. If you want to get really spicy with it, you could add some feta cheese, You could dice up some Kalamata tomatoes, or Kalamata olives. So yeah, you can get really, but that's something that we do.
And in addition to that, and how long it lasts in the refrigerator, that's where something that, if portion control, so if I knew I was prepping and if it was going to take me a little bit longer than normal, I would add extra portions deliberately so that I can get 2 meals out of it.
Yep.
So we would have dinner
For sure.
and then lunch I could take the next day. But of
Yep.
course, like you said, I'm not one to reheat fish the next day, and I certainly know that's the cardinal rule in an office somewhere.
Right.
The person that brings the fish to microwave, no. You must hate everyone in there if you do that.
Yeah, that's definitely been me, and I've definitely been talked to about it.
That and burnt popcorn.
Right? So funky. So funky.
This has been fabulous, and this is exactly why you came to mind when I was going through this, because when I look at it in terms of a caregiver, how to help the caregiver remain healthy and expand their knowledge, their base, their energy sources.
Yes.
This is the big thing. I mean, we have other topics to go into for other days, but this is one of the, I believe personally it starts here.
For sure.
Because it is that Pareto principle. 80% of what we do has, or 20% of what we do has 80% of the results out of our life, or some kind of
variation on that.
variation of that. And so when we start with how we fuel ourselves, we can go just about anywhere from there. And the sad part of it is with caregivers, and this includes parents, because parents are caregivers. I know we call them parents because they're the little ones that you're biologically tied to, but you're still a caregiver. You're still caring for someone else other than yourself. And for us as caregivers of older parents or care recipients, when our care recipients pass on, the caregiver tends to get sick or even more ill in some cases because they've put everything into their care recipient, and they have pretty much lost sight of their own care, their own self-care. And so much of this does start with the lifestyle in nutrition. So
I agree.
Thank you so much for helping
Thanks
explain.
for inviting me.
It gets to be, I mean, we could talk for hours because there's so much more to do.
I love to talk about food. Anytime you want me to talk about food.
And now I'm hungry now that all of this.
I know. Well, thank you.
Definitely. So thanks everybody for tuning in today. This is going to take us right into the next one where we talk about lifestyle and how this fueling up for nutrition goes into once you get this fuel, what you do with it. In our next podcast, we're going to go over lifestyle in terms of exercise and fitness. And if you would like to hear more, or if you missed any of the other ones, you definitely can reach out on online and find it under jessicalazellcannon.com. And you absolutely can find Katie Epps at mybodygx.com.
Yep, absolutely. And if you want to follow me on Instagram because you like the idea of the recipes that I've been talking about, I post them on the regular, usually two to four recipes a week. So at mybodygx, I would love to have you check out the recipes. And I also do fitness and workouts on there as well. So if that's something that you're interested in as well, there's everything from, body weight to gym exercises. So I'm looking at all health and wellness, the entire kit and caboodle.
Highly recommend her.
All right, thank you.
Until next time.
To learn more about proactive caregiving and to hear other episodes of this podcast, please go to www.jessicalazellcannon.com. That's www.jessicalazellcannon.com. This podcast is produced by Cannon Light Media LLC. www.cannonlightmedia.com. Music provided by Chris Paradise.